Welcome, council staff, councillors, visitors to the gallery. The ordinary meeting of council here tonight on Tuesday 2nd of October in the council chamber here at the corporate centre. East Gippsland Shire Council live streams, records and publishes its meetings via webcasting to enhance accessibility of its meetings to the broader East Gippsland community. These recordings are also archived and available for viewing by the public or used for publicity or information purposes. At the appropriate times during the meeting, any members of the gallery who are addressing the council will have their images, comments or submissions recorded. Please ensure that mobile phones and any other electronic device are turned off or in silent mode for the duration of the meeting. I'd like to commence on behalf of council to acknowledge the Gunai people, the traditional owners of the land where we're gathered, and pay our respects to their elders, both past and present. Item 1.2, apologies.
We have three apologies from councillors that had leaves of absence. That's Councillor Jackson Roberts, Councillor Dick Ellis and Councillor Colin Toohey.
Thank you, Mr CEO. Item 1.3 is declaration of conflicts of interest.
We've received no declaration of conflict of interest.
Item 1.4 is the confirmation of the minutes of the ordinary council meeting held on Tuesday the 4th of September 2018 be confirmed, and that the minutes of the special council meeting held on Tuesday the 11th of September 2018 be confirmed. Do we have a mover for that? Moved Councillor O'Connell, seconded Councillor Pels. Any questions or items that need to be discussed out of that? Thank you. All those in favour? Against? That's carried. Thank you. Item 1.5 is our next meeting schedule, and we have a special council meeting to consider the annual report 2017-18, Tuesday the 9th of October, to be held at the corporate centre here in Bairnsdale. We also have the special statutory council meeting to elect the Mayor and Deputy Mayor for the ensuing period on Tuesday the 30th of October, also to be held here at the corporate centre 6 p.m. And then we have an ordinary council meeting on Tuesday the 13th of November to be held at the corporate centre commencing at 1 p.m. Item 1.6 is a request for leave of absence.
Mr Mayor, I just like to request leave next Tuesday at that special council meeting. I have other appointments, so I can't attend.
Noted, Councillor Reeves. Any other requests? All those in favour? Yeah. So that was moved by Councillor Reeves. I need a seconder, Councillor Pels. All those in favour? Thank you. Item 1.7 is public question time, Mr CEO.
Mr Mayor, we have three public question times, two from Mr Morris Borgeld of Lakes Entrance and one from Judith Reid from Fisher's Lane. Mr Borgeld would like to come forward to ask those questions.
Thank you, Mr Borgeld. We have got the background to your questions, and if you'd like to be specific to your questioning, we have replied to several questions before on the same matter. Thank you, Mr Borgeld.
I'm not sure I know what you mean by all that.
Oh, could you please ask your question?
Yes. The Good Neighbour Code of Practice doesn't apply to Lakes Entrance Carnival. The Good Neighbour Code of Practice has never been adhered to in relation to the Lakes Entrance Foreshore Carnival, even in the initial years of the carnival trials, where the public and neighbours were being told that the Good Neighbour Code of Practice was being strictly adhered to. At no time during the process have the neighbours been adequately notified of their rights as mandated in the code. This is the main reason for the code existing. Is this because, as I've been informed lately by Council's Planning Department, that the Good Neighbour Code of Practice doesn't apply to Crown land upon which the carnival is on? Question: does the Good Neighbour Code of Practice as a planning tool apply to Crown land, or was there a deliberate ploy to deceive the neighbours and public?
Mr Holton.
Thanks for the question. Look, the first point I'd make is that the Good Neighbourhood Code of Practice for circuses and carnivals is not a planning tool in itself. Rather, where a circus or carnival complies with the requirements of the code, no planning permit is required to undertake that activity. In cases where the circus or carnival is conducted on land that has been nominated by council for the purposes of such activities, there is no requirement to give notice to neighbours. However, it should be noted that council undertakes a comprehensive post-carnival survey to residents and neighbours, which more than satisfies the spirit of the requirement that I just mentioned above, which doesn't really apply in those circumstances.
Thank you, Mr Holt. And Mr Borgelt, you had a second question?
Well, that question was, does it apply to Crown land? I haven't had a yes or a no yet. I've asked it that many times, it doesn't matter.
Mr Holton answered your question. What was your second question, Mr Borgelt?
I reckon that's 5 times I've asked that question. Flawed expression of interest process for Lakes Entrance Carnival. The expression of interest process to choose a carnival operator for Lakes Entrance Christmas Carnival has been very poorly handled in timing, advertising and information available to the potential
Mr Borgelt, could you please ask your question?
Well, the EIO was conducted more, as far as timing goes, the EIO was conducted more than 16 months before the carnival is to start. The EIO was conducted over carnival operators' busiest time, covering the whole of the Brisbane Adelaide shows and 2 days before the Melbourne show. As a possible proponent, I delivered written questions to council 29 days before the close of the EIO. No answers were received before 3 days towards the end of the close.
Mr Borgelt, can you please ask your question?
Not till after.
If you can't respect this chamber, I'll have to ask you to stop talking. Can you please ask your question, Mr Borgelt?
Excuse me, I've just finished reading yesterday through all the questions that have been asked, and most of them have a preamble. As well as answers being delayed, they were mostly inadequate or wrong. Though asked, I was not told of the camping area possibly organised by council. Though asked, I was told there was no electricity on the site, even though for 6 years operators have used council's on-site electric box. Though asked what parts of the Good Neighbour Code of Practice council considers as applicable, no answer was forthcoming. And as far as advertising goes, the only advertising for the EIO was in local papers. Unlike normally and in previous years, the EIO was not put on.
Can you please ask the question, Mr Borgelt?
For the EIO and tenders. Then there's a thing that's a Q, which means question. Why did the poor timing, information and advertising occur in relation to the Lakes Entrance Christmas Carnival EIO process? Will council consider redoing the expression of interest for the Lakes Entrance Christmas Carnival in a more competent manner?
I'll have to answer that question. As Mr Borgelt pointed out, the EOI has been conducted well in advance of the EOI for the period beginning 2019-2020. Has been conducted well in advance of that time, which I believe is anything but poor timing. It allows the carnival to be, whoever is operating the carnival, to plan well in advance for what they wish to present as part of that carnival. So, and in relation to the question about conducting the process once more, there is no intention at this stage to redo that process. For that period of time, a second time. So we have no intention of repeating ourselves.
Thank you, Mr Holden. Thank you, Mr Borgelt. Next question was from Judith Reid. Would you like to come forward, Judith? Is Judith present? Reid? Perhaps you could read the question, Mr CEO.
They're meant to be present, Mr Mayor, so I can't read the question.
I'm happy for you to read the question, Mr CEO.
They have to be present because that's part of the local law.
They have to be present.
You can't break a local law.
Or it can't be accepted.
Okay,
We'll take it on notice and we'll write to the individual.
yeah, I think if you can take it on notice, definitely not here, so thank you.
No, it was, it came in through the process, so.
Item 1.8.1 is the assemblies of councillors, and there's a recommendation there, councillors. So it's moved, Councillor Pels. Do we have a second? Is there any questions in relation to those Assembly of Council meetings? Okay, if there's no questions, I'll put the recommendation as a motion. All those in favour? Against? That's carried. Thank you. Item 1.9, petitions. Councillor Reeves.
No, that was going to be presented at council business. Council business.
Excellent. Thank you.
Nil received. Nil, Mr Mayor.
So item 2, notices of motion and or rescission of motion.
There's nil.
Deferred business, item 3.
There's nil, Mr Mayor.
Before we move into councillor reports, I'd like to, following discussion with Councillor White, I'd like to move a notice of condolence for Dr Neville Beasley, and I'll read some wording and hopefully Councillor White can move that for me. Councillor, I wish to foreshadow moving a notice of condolence following the passing of Dr Neville Beasley of Delvine Park, Fernbank, on the 19th of September, aged 93. Dr Beasley was a pioneering vet and cattle grazier with a strong connection to the East Gippsland region, farming at Black Mountain Station and then later at Delvine Park for the last 40 years. We extend our sympathies to Neville's wife Judy and children Nicholas, Zoe, Sean, a former councillor and also Mayor of East Gippsland Shire, and Sophie, also the grandchildren and great-grandchildren. To his family, he inspired and set a course that they are proud to follow, and we stand with them in mourning his loss and celebrating his achievements. So moved, Councillor White. Need a second. Councillor Pels. All those in favour? Did you want to add anything, Councillor White?
It could be spoken to now, if I may.
Yep.
Otherwise I could do it with my report. But I'd just like to say that I did attend Dr Beasley's funeral because he has been a great friend over probably 45 years of living in this area, also a neighbour, a trusted friend, and it was really pleasing to see that the chapel was completely full to overflowing with respectful mourners. But one thing that probably came out of it, at 93, he still had a vision, and Sean, his son, spoke at the service and said that only a very short time before he passed away, he'd ordered a box of a dozen bottles of scotch. So Sean has promised that they won't go to waste, that he should find a use for them. But a wonderful man, great tributes to him, and he will be missed. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor White. Councillor reports. Councillor O'Connell.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I'll keep my report brief. I just wanted to speak about Harriet Shing was in Omeo last month to announce $200,000 funding through the Living Heritage Grants for the Omeo Justice Precinct. This is in conjunction with council funds as well, and the funding will be used for works on both the old courthouse and the new courthouse. The precinct is around 160 years old and in desperate need of preservation. The courthouse is an iconic part of Omeo and one of East Gippsland's most prominent buildings, so it was particularly pleasing to see the hard work of the members of the Omeo Historical Society pay off. Congratulations to all involved. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Connell. Councillor Reeves.
Thanks, Mr Mayor, councillors and our guests gathered in the gallery. A couple of matters that I'll just draw to your attention apart from what I've submitted on my report. And first of all, I attended on behalf of the Shire at VAI, the Warwicker Awards, and at the Aborigines Advancement League on the 13th of September. And this was a great tribute to the work done by our Shire and our officers in our reconciliation plan and the movie that was made for our reconciliation plan. And we received a commendation and a runners-up award. We were pipped at the post, unfortunately, but we were duly noted as having contributed greatly in this particular area. So in a moment I'll present that to you, Mr Mayor, to hand over to the Shire to display. And the second matter that I'd like to just draw attention to is attending the Wairua Fire Brigade at Nawanawa recently, and I just checked the date, must have been in September, 15th of September it was, and they tabled a copy of a petition that they presented to the local member and have asked us to support and advocate on their behalf for a new fire facility at Nawanawa, and I think that that's a great thing to do, and we're all deeply concerned with planning, preparation and response around emergencies, and at the moment we're under-resourced at Nawanawa. Their vehicles are co-located at one of the Dalwip sheds, and this is not quite as it should be, and that shed is going to change, so we hope that that will assist the funding of a dedicated CFA facility there at Nawanawa in future, so that the CFA Nawanawa and Wairua will be co-located on 2 locations in future. That's the plan. So I'm sure that we will support that petition that has been presented to the local member, Mr Bull. Now, among other matters, I'd also draw attention to the fact that the Minister for Agriculture, Charla Pulford, has visited the Shire recently and made some announcements about drought relief. For visitors who travel through our Shire, there's a bit of a perception that we're doing pretty well, that it looks green and it looks quite healthy. Compared to the picture on the screen up there, we are quite green, but there's not much feed around. It's a pretty grim situation. We are drought declared, and we welcome the announcements from the state government of about $5 million worth of drought relief packages. So they're the matters that I wanted to draw attention to that are important for our community at the moment. So a couple of symbolic matters, some practical matters, and also the fact that we should note that many of our farmers in East Gippsland are struggling at the moment. And what's most important is that these farmers, the recovery time is not going to be when it rains, that the impact on their business is going to be 3, 4, 5 years if they do recover fully in the future. So just to bear that in mind, councillors. But here's the things I want to present to you, Mr Mayor. Excellent. And I'll hand over those documents. I'm sure that there'll be...
Turn around, gentlemen. There's the man with the camera.
Okay, very good.
What is that award for?
This is for our reconciliation movie.
Oh, good.
Yeah, so...
Oh, yeah, that was great.
That was a great movie. Yeah, excellent.
And it's on our website?
Yes, it's available on our website, and there's a link through YouTube.
That's the second one.
No, it's terrific. So I was very proud to be able to receive that and be with my friends at the Aborigines Advancement League. It was a great time.
Yeah, we're pleased to say that some of our regional stakeholders are also using that cultural awareness video as part of their staff training induction. So it's a great resource. Yeah. Thank you, Councillor Reeves. Councillor White.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Only the one event for the month of note, and that was to attend last Wednesday evening the induction of the Reverend Muston, who will be presiding over the Lakes Entrance and Meetung areas for the church, and he has come to the area from the Warrigal parish, I guess, and very pleased to be here, and the parishioners are very happy to have someone now, because they've actually had a, I think they called them a locum, for about 2 years now, that was meant to only have been for a few months, so they're quite happy that they now have a full-time minister in the area. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor White. Councillor Pels.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Fellow councillors and members of the gallery, thanks for joining us this evening. I had a few things that I wanted to discuss this evening. I had the pleasure of attending the high school roller derby skills upgrade. It was and they've given us a certificate which I need to also present to the Mayor on their behalf. It was a roller derby junior girls program started by the Gippsland Lakes Roller Derby group, and basically they were upskilling young girls between the age of 12 and 17 to have a go and get into it, and some of them were really great and some of them were at beginning, and they were all learning and having a go, and I was really pleased to be amongst them. There was probably about 19 girls there, and you know, they were really sweet, and I was really pleased for them to be able to have that opportunity, because programs like these don't often come into our area, and to see the uptake and people actually participating was fantastic. So on behalf of the roller derby girls, a certificate from Roller Derby High to the Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor.
No worries, thank you. With that said, I had the pleasure of having lunch with the Deputy Prime Minister, Michael McCormack, late last month at the Rural Press Club in the city, and we were mainly covered with journalists there, but there were a few of the die-hard councillors that were actually advocating for road upgrades and things. As my new role, I'm now the chair of seats for the next 2 years, which is quite a reputable position and great that we can actually be participating in that as well. And but the Seats group has put out a petition for the Princess Highway east of Sale to Wollongong to be recognised as a road of national importance and to be put back on the register. And we feel this is a really important thing for the 17 councils involved. So I was able to raise that question with him and highlight you know, what has been done with that, and he recognised that he'd received that in Canberra through our beloved Honourable Darren Chester, and that he would be looking further into it. I also asked him to fulfil Darren Chester's work in regards to making sure that the fuel excise money is spent more fairly and that Victoria gets a fair portion of that, given the fact that we only receive about 1/3 of what we should be receiving. Queensland and New South Wales have done exceptionally well, and happened to mention that it was very obvious when we had a federal minister for roads that those areas were always receiving big amounts of funding, which he said, oh, I can't be sure, and I said, I can show you the figures. So I think, impactful for him anyway. And I'd also like to state one thing that we didn't talk about was we had the youth ambassadors around the table last week, and their open discussion was very interesting. It's always a great pleasure to have them come in and chat to us around the table and hear what they've been up to and what they're doing in their life and how they're making new events for the youth and that. But one thing that was a bit disturbing for me was the fact that they were actually saying to us they have a problem of drugs in and around the community. They also said, and I felt terrible about it, that they can get, it's easier for them to buy drugs at school than it is to actually find information out about drugs at school, and I felt sick about it. I thought it was just disgraceful that this is how our community has developed. I feel we need to do more in this space and be more accepting to what they actually require. They were virtually saying to us, can you get those people out of our school and tell them to stop selling drugs in our schools? And although it's not our position, they actually want to learn. They're like sponges. They want so much information, and it's sad that they can't be receiving it. Although it's not our system, our officers will be going through and making sure that it's heard from our perspective, that this is a concern for the youth of today, and that it really seriously needs to be addressed on all levels, whether it be with council, the school and their staff, and also the police force too. And I think it's something that we need to get together over and address as a group. So I look forward to some more work in that in the next few months. But thank you, Mr Mayor, that's the end of my report.
Thank you, Councillor Pels. I've submitted my report, but just one key thing that I wanted to mention was the Canberra Region Joint Organisation, which East Gippsland Shire is a member of, and we recently met in Canberra, our second meeting, and it's important that we keep fostering that relationship with that Southwest New South Wales group of councils, in particular the Snowy Monero and the Bega Valley councils, which are our closest cross-border neighbours, and continue to look at ways where we can improve our services together and potentially explore some opportunities around tourism and other industry development opportunities. But the trip to Canberra was a good opportunity to visit some federal ministers after the recent reshuffle of Prime Minister and portfolios. And we met with Dan Tehan, Minister for Education, to advocate further for our East Gippsland Tertiary Hub, which one of 8 is, we hope to be one of the 8 that will be established across regional Australia. We also met with Michael McCormack's Senior Advisor, Steve Campbell, who's familiar with Gippsland, and we also spoke about the bundle of projects, infrastructure projects for Lakes Entrance under the Regional Growth Fund. We pushed him for when that might be announced, but there was no commitment there to when that's going to be announced. But the cynic in me says that perhaps it's going to be timed around some future election, maybe. We also met with Senator Bridget McKenzie in relation to her new portfolio and looking after the $1 million drought fund that's been announced for East Gippsland and Wellington. And unfortunately, we did receive some of those guidelines, and we think we need to have some further discussions with Minister McKenzie around some better guidelines. The only other thing I wanted to mention was the great support that we've seen with a couple of convoys of fodder into our region, namely from the Lions Club from Pakenham, and they did one Need for Feed run, and also probably the last one that came through was from the Rapid Relief team, and I thought theirs was really important. They worked with the Rural Financial Counsellor to ensure they were targeting young farmers that had just got into the industry and make sure that they felt like there was support for them, and I thought that was really important. So thank you. That brings us up to item 5.1.1. It's a report on East Gippsland Shire Grants Program Funding Round 1 2018-2019, and we have Sasha Johns in attendance. Thank you.
Good evening, councillors. As you would be aware, Council offers 2 rounds of community arts and heritage grants annually. Before you are the recommendations for round 1 of the 2018-2019 grants program, which opened on the 7th of June and closed on the 1st of August. The grants program is intended to provide local community-based organisations the opportunity to access funding for activities that strengthen our communities, encourage sustainability, promote health and wellbeing, foster cultural diversity and stimulate the arts and local economies across East Gippsland. A series of afternoon and evening grants information sessions were held across the Shire in June to assist community members with their project queries, to advise on how to plan and write a project proposal and budget, how to access and complete applications on the Smarty Grant system, and to connect program staff with communities. Locations for these workshops for this round included Lindenow Community Hall, Bairnsdale Library, Can River Community Centre, Swifts Creek Community Centre, Benambra Neighbourhood House, and Goongra and Tubbett Neighbourhood House via phone. Officers were also available to provide one-on-one support should community members or groups require further assistance in the lead up to submitting applications. This round of grants attracted 47 applications, requesting a total of $165,429 to support projects with a total project value of $650,854,100. The projects proposed were diverse and came from a wide range of applications, which is very encouraging. The annual Community and Arts and Heritage Grant allocation is $156,363. There is a community value-adding aspect of the program, with all funding provided on a dollar-for-dollar matching requirement. This means that Council achieves more value for each dollar expended than would be the case for projects without these partnerships. The 47 applications received were assessed by a panel against the criteria outlined in the grant guidelines. Projects recommended for funding by the panel complied with the eligibility criteria outlined in the grant guidelines, showed strong public value and reach, and demonstrated good value for money demonstrated through well-planned projects. Of the 47 applications received, 28 have been recommended to a total of $83,009.09 and a total project value of $390,977.90. Unsuccessful applicants will be provided with feedback as to why they were either ineligible or unsuccessful, and support and encouragement will be provided to assist them to further develop their projects or to seek funding through other sources. Attached to the council report is a list of the recommended projects. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer any that I can.
Thank you, Ms Johns. Questions, councillors? Yes, Councillor Pels.
Okay. May I just ask, with regards to some of the projects are centenary, 100 years celebration or recognition of, well, one of them's the Bush Nursing Centenary and the other one was the Bairnsdale Golf Club, I think, and they haven't been recognised for funding, but I was wondering whether there's opportunity in other areas or if they've been guided to another portion that they could actually access successful funding for.
So if there are other opportunities for them to access funding outside of council's funding grant program, they will certainly be assisted to do so, but ineligible for our criteria means that we can't actually support those even though they may be worthy projects.
Thank you, Councillor Pels. I would like to make a quick comment just on the multiplier and return on investment for council. It's incredible. It's, you know, it's a 4 times multiplier and a great outcome for our community. So the recommendation's been moved as a motion from Councillor Pels. Do we have a seconder? Councillor O'Connell. Any speakers?
I'd just like to say this is always an exciting part for us each year, each time it comes around, and to say that the staff do a really good job making sure that it's all adhered to, that the specific criteria is ticked and it's appropriate for that funding to be spent in that area. And as Joe said, as Councillor Rottino said, there was, it goes around 4-fold and 36 applicants have been successful in this round. So the 56,000 that's being applied to will go around 3-fold. It's 200,000 for our community. It's good. Thank you.
Any further speakers? Councillor Reeves.
Yeah, thanks, Mr Mayor. I note and agree with your comments about the multiplier effect in the financial sense, but we can also quantify the social and community benefits of these grant programs. You know, the fact that community organisations have gone to the effort of applying for grants, receive them, the social capital that's grown around those grants as well is absolutely important and should also be noted, I think.
Yep.
So again, to the officers who have been so diligent in assessing them, it's a hard task to say no to some obviously worthy projects, but you have done that, and on behalf of the councillors and the community, I thank you for that work, but also to those community organisations for their contribution to our community, I thank you as well.
Thank you, Councillor Reeves. Any further speakers? I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against? That's carried. Thank you. Next item is 5.2.1, and we've had a request to speak to this agenda item. And Mr. Stefan Kempf, would you like to come forward, please?
Mr Mayor, councillors and fellow guests, thank you for lending me a little bit of time. I won't take up too much of it. I'm just here in person to reinforce my conviction and that of my family and neighbours in objecting to the planning permit number 174/2018/P pertaining to a large illuminated promotional sign. I'm also showing my support and gratitude to the planning officers for their recommendation not to have that planning permit supported. Without going into any detail, which is spelled out in the submissions, I just wanted to highlight that the proposed sign will negatively impact not only my family, it will also negatively impact on my neighbours and on the character and amenity of our great little locality in Numarella. So thank you for your attention, and I trust that the application for the proposed promotional sign will not be supported by council.
Thank you, Mr. Kemp.
Thank you.
Would you like to ask Mr. Yes?
In what manner will you say it will negatively impact? In what manner, when you say it will negatively impact you and your family, can you precisely go into that detail?
I can, Mariam.
Thank you.
And I'll read it from our submissions. I'll stay on script. So that sign will be visible day and night due to some illumination directly from our residence. It will negatively impact on our predominant views from our major living area, from our bedroom, outside entertainment area, as we've provided in the photographs. We think that our quality of life is also negatively impacted because we currently are lucky enough to enjoy a serene rural outlook by day and night with darkness, unlike that which can be experienced in the city. And I think our property, or we believe our property will be devalued, as it will be less desirable for potential buyers, with a predominant outlook being an illuminated major promotional sign. Thank you.
Any further questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Now ask Mr. Pringle to come forward and present planning permit item 5.2.1, application 174-2018P, application for development of an externally illuminated major promotion sign at 10 Prestons Road, Numarella. Thank you, Mr. Pringle.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and councillors. As stated, this report is in relation to a major promotional sign, and the proposal is for external illumination component as demonstrated in the plans that were submitted for council's consideration. Our assessment has been undertaken in light of the East Gippsland planning scheme, and specifically the planning policy framework and the municipal strategic statement, as well as the particular provision in relation to signs, which is contained within the scheme. On the basis of the objections that have been received and on our assessment as professionals, we agree with the objectors that this sign represents potential material detriment to the property owners and also represents visual clutter in the landscape. That although the zone is commercial, the predominant use of the land is not that of a commercial nature, and we express our opinion as officers that on those bases that we do not approve the sign, and that is our recommendation before council.
Thank you, Mr. Pringle. Questions, councillors? Councillor Pels?
Yes, I have a question. In regards to your statement saying that it is not within the neighbourhood character, how can you define that in this particular development?
Certainly there is a broad mix in Numarella in relation to the character of the environment. Predominantly we assess it as a rural township that, unlike other rural townships in our Shire, has a history of being zoned for commercial purposes, for industrial purposes, and other light industry type activities. This particular area being within a commercial zone, we understand that there's not a lot of commercial activity within that zone. Predominantly, it's a rural residential and even farming agricultural type activities that are occurring today. On that basis, we don't believe that a major promotion sign is in line with the character of that area, being low density or rural style living accommodation. And although there is a commercial facility adjacent to this site, one commercial facility does not necessarily mean that it is the predominant character of the area. Though there's a highway present, and the highway would suggest that more commercial activity could occur, we don't think it's appropriate at this time. And if there was more commercial activity there, perhaps it would be more appropriate.
Yeah, certainly, Councillor Pearls.
In regards to the other sign that is placed, what do we say, 200 metres down the road, what's the difference between that particular sign and this proposed sign?
When we did our assessment for that other sign, the presentation to council in the application package was predominantly that this was about road safety, and the message that came across, although it could be other users, the branding that was provided to officers to assess was that of the TAC. And we were looking at opportunities to maybe reduce visual clutter in other environments, because TAC has a habit of using on Vic Road's land their temporary or mobile signs, which can obstruct the landscape even more severely. So we thought that the consolidation of a single sign within the landscape would be appropriate in that case. It was noted in the officer's recommendation that was done under delegation that further applications in this area would be given a higher level of scrutiny based on the potential for visual clutter to be experienced.
Okay, and have you had the discussion with the applicant about not having the sign? I noticed in our notes that the illumination portion of the proposal has been taken away, and so it is no longer an illuminated sign, it's just a really big sign. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the applicant had proposed to council and to council officers a without prejudice offer to remove the illumination component of the application. There was discussion between the applicant and officers about the potential to amend the application to address that, and the question was raised whether council officers' position would change. Council officers' position was not changed, and therefore the applicant requested that without prejudice note be made to councillors. And they did preface that with, although the previous approval had included external illumination as well, that component had not been acted on, so that other sign that we've previously approved is not externally illuminated.
Other councillors? Councillor White, you have a question?
I just hope this isn't going down the wrong path, but you've said that it is for commercial purposes, those sites. What would happen if on that particular site a large building was asked to be erected that perhaps would produce employment in the area and possibly be much larger than the sign? What would your thoughts be on council's policy on that situation?
Without seeing an application, I can't comment exactly. However, a commercial development within a commercial zone, most likely a use of the land would be permitted as of right. The buildings and works would be subject to consideration and would have application requirements to be met. But generally speaking, we would likely be supportive.
Councillor White, Councillor Pels, you had another... Oh, Councillor Reeves, did you want to go first? And then Councillor Pels can follow up.
Mr Pringle, just to clarify, this is a zone commercial, this particular area, because there is the commercial storage units next door, and this is a commercial undertaking, so it seems consistent, and I understand there are a lot of issues around interpreting statutory requirements around this, so I understand that it's not an easy decision. But we have a precedent of a sign already on the other side of the existing storage units. And the objections are mostly around the illumination, and that's been offered to be removed. Is that correct?
Yes, those statements are correct.
Yep. Okay, thank you.
And Councillor Pels, you had a follow-up question?
Yes, my follow-up question is based on John's particularly, on the grounds that he explained a scenario, but if we've already set a precedent with regards to signage in this area, and these people have come up with a innovative way of making an additional income which is appropriate to the actual zoning, I feel by putting a refusal on it, it's showing a bad sign and it's inconsistent. Can you explain? I'm finding it hard to consume the fact that you've said yes in one spot and no in the other. I'm really not consuming that very well.
Yeah. So really, each application that we get is based on its own merits, but at the same time, we do have to consider the amenity of the area. Certainly, amenity considerations come in many forms, and I think in this case, it represents what values do we want to hold for that area. Certainly, that it is a commercially zoned area, we would hope that ongoing employment would take precedence in that area. And an economic benefit to the landowner, yes, is an economic benefit to that landowner. However, in this case, we do have to consider whether the economic benefit outweighs the visual amenity that is going to be potentially lost through a clutter of signs. Now, the owner of that land and the businesses in Numarella may benefit by being able to purchase advertisement space on that billboard, on that major promotion sign. However, it's unlikely that they are going to outbid major corporations that will provide a steady income for that sign. That being said, I think the potential for multiple signs to be erected on that site will probably only benefit the landowner and the major corporations, potentially businesses in the region, but at a greater cost to those businesses than maybe a commercial venture. Say if that land as commercial were to be leased out to somebody to be able to be used for employment, which would benefit a greater number of people.
Yeah,
Thank
another
you.
question, Councillor?
I have another question. In regards to the signage, I don't quite understand, or I don't quite get the difference that we're limiting this, that what you're putting a hypothetical in saying it may go to a corporate company, but what if the corporate company is Vic Roads again and they're putting a safety sign up in regards to road safety usage in the community and within our region? I don't have can you explain what the difference would be?
I think in the case of, say, if it was being used for road safety, there is definitely opportunity for the current sign to be used for that purpose. And again, commercial purposes can be used on that other sign that we've previously approved. The change that can happen on those signage, it can be done quite frequently. Obviously less frequent than you would get with an electronic type billboard that can be changed and flash and those kind of things, and it's definitely not what we want in that locality. But I don't see a reason why we need to have multiple signs in that corridor, especially multiple signs that are talking about road safety. Yes, it is an important issue, obviously in light of recent events in that area. However, I don't think that we should be justifying further road safety measures as a reason to grant an approval in this case.
Yep. Thanks, Mr. Pringle. Councillor O'Connell, you had a question?
Thanks, Mr. Pringle. I'm just wondering if the objectors have been consulted about the applicant's change in illumination of the sign. Would that meet their concerns?
Thank you, Councillor O'Connell. I think the issues that were raised don't necessarily only relate to the illumination factor. The visual prominence in the daytime period was also expressed, and because we hadn't received a amended application, we didn't go directly to the objectors. However, we did afford them the opportunity and they were notified about this meeting. Obviously, we've seen someone speak on the motion, and I believe that, well, without putting words into the objectors' mouths, I do believe that they would have maintained their objections.
Thanks, Councillor O'Connell. Any further questions, councillors? You're foreshadowing something. Would you like to speak to the councillor?
Sorry, I just on a technical issue, we distributed an alternative motion earlier, but there were some key elements that are part of the scheme that, for an oversight on Robert's part, they weren't included in that. If you want to just explain just what that is, the motion is still ostensibly the same, but just with some key conditions that are required under the scheme.
We'll distribute that now.
Yeah.
So I'm happy to distribute that one. It's just a technical issue.
We might need 5 minutes, Mr Mayor, so we can read it.
Yes, certainly. Would you like to distribute it, Mr Holt?
But just to explain what the changes are and why,
Please.
just reviewed the planning scheme requirements and my report in terms of the detailed assessment against the planning scheme, and noted that there were a couple of key conditions that I had left out, a couple of which are absolute requirements that the planning scheme states any decision to approve must contain these conditions. You notice most of them are condition 5 has been merged into a single condition with more dot points.
And it can only be a notice of decision.
Yes, it can only be a notice of decision with objections.
Clarification, if I may, Mr Mayor.
Yes, certainly, Councillor.
The 15-year date issue of date, how does that come about?
There is a planning scheme requirement in the sign provision relating specifically to major promotion signs, requiring that a permit granted only have a lifespan of 15 years. There is potential for an applicant to make a application or part of the application to request a longer time period, and that was not requested as part of this permit. It's likely expected that in 15 years' time we would see an application made under the then planning scheme for either an extension to the permit or for a fresh permit, basically requesting a similar time period.
Certainly.
In regards to the application, if it was to be granted this evening, if the property is sold, does the permit allow for the new owner to proceed with the same arrangements?
A planning permit is always tied to the land. So in this case, if the land were to be sold, that permit would continue to have life and be acted on.
Just to clarify again, it's only a notice of decision. We can't actually grant it tonight.
Yes.
Yeah.
Specifically on the new pieces that Paul Holton has just handed to us, the changes refer only to section 5 from what was handed out earlier when we sat down.
Yes, Councillor Powell, sorry, just to clarify, it's in relation to condition 5 and also to condition 6 in relation to landscaping requirement. So on the previous version that you would have looked at, there were a number of independent conditions in relation to what a sign must not do, i.e. must not just dazzle, distract, and those sorts of things. But in reviewing the background documentation for this report, I also noticed that I had made a suggestion that a landscaping plan be provided to reduce the impact of the pillars to support the sign structure.
With that said, Mr Mayor, I'm still happy to move the second motion to grant the actual.
So it's a foreshadowed motion.
Yes.
Do we need to read that out?
If councillors have read and are happy with the alternative notice of decision, because you flagged the alternative and haven't put the motion, you just move to the alternative. So it doesn't need, if you don't need to read it out in entirety, if you're happy with those read.
Council's had enough time to read through that alternate motion.
Are there any more questions about the alternative motion?
Have you got any more questions?
I haven't got any more questions.
Any other councillors have any questions on this particular amended or alternate motion?
I've got one. If this was to be permitted tonight, if we were to grant a permission of the sign to be put up and it went to VCAT, what likelihood was it that would actually stand?
If I could just respond, Councillor Pell.
Mr. Holton.
I think this is one of those ones that could go either way. I think Robert would agree that we wouldn't be willing to speculate on an outcome at VCAT because it would largely depend on the member and their view of the world at the time. So very difficult to speculate on how this would go at VCAT. It's not cut and dried.
Yeah, on that ground, I'm still happy to go ahead with the recommendation.
It's been moved by Councillor Pearls. Do we have a seconder for that? Councillor White. Speakers.
I'd like to speak to it. Look, it disappoints me tonight to be doing this because I would have thought that consistency would be the main thing in regards to a sign such as this. I look at it and I think for the applicant we would be limiting income, potential income for the property, and I believe that they've come up with an innovative alternative solution to just grazing cattle on this place. To me, this is in a township zone of New Morella, and it's an area that we actually have an active business in. We're wanting to promote development in this community, and any kind of investment is good investment, even if it's a sign. And hopefully it's a sign saying please drive safely in our area, that it gets picked up by Vic Roads or the likes of that. I believe it's a reasonable request for the applicant, and the block is actually zoned appropriately for this application, and it's zoned industrial. When I look over the road, there's power works, there's a school, there's CFA, and there's a mill yard on the eastern side, which is all commercial to me. And when I look on the west side, there's Snowy Lodge Motel, storage units, the sign for Vic Roads, billboards, and then there's the Meccan Sawmill and the BP service station. So to me, I look at it and I believe they're all commercial uses. And for us to be denying these people of a relevant application to have an alternative income for something that's not there at the moment, I think we're remiss, and we're not actually being consistent in our application of the planning scheme. So for me tonight, I actually propose that the alternative recommendation of granting a application approval for this particular application is appropriate for this particular application
Notice of decision.
site. Yeah, the notice. Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor White, did you want to speak as a seconder?
Yes, I would like to think that there would be a bigger benefit to the greater community in the Orbost area, because with the sighting of a sign, if some of the advertising is taken up by businesses in Orbost itself, we could look at saying that they've got the visitors to the area, people passing through, have got around about 2 kilometres to make up their mind as to whether they wish to stay on the highway or to perhaps stop in Orbost and have a look around and perhaps buy some merchandise, stop at a coffee shop, and I would look at that as a good thing for the Orbost community. which we worry about because of the downturn in the economy, and I would think that they should benefit, and it'd give people a reason to pull off the highway and stop in the town and have a look around.
Thanks, Councillor White. For the benefit of our presenter that's in the gallery, Mr Holton, would you like to explain the process of the notice of decision?
Certainly, Mr Mayor. So if Council adopts the alternate recommendation that has been distributed, the applicant will need to wait 28 days before a permit can be granted. During that time, the people who object, who are opposing the development, have the opportunity to seek a hearing at VCAT to put their case to VCAT as to why it shouldn't be proceeded with. If VCAT finds in favour of the proponent, then in those cases the proponent will get a permit issued by VCAT and be able to proceed with their development. If the VCAT member finds in favour of the objectors, then that application will be, refused.
Yep. Thank you, Mr Holton. Any further speakers against the? No further speakers. No speakers against. Speakers for. Councillor Reeves.
I'm happy to speak in favour of the alternative motion. I've agonised over this, and when I saw the original application and it was illuminated, I was concerned. And I do understand the concerns of the local community, the people who live nearby. Having said that, it is a major highway. There is an all 24-hour service station down the road. There's effectively a truck stop across the road. There is a lot of movement, a lot of activity along that particular section. So I guess we have to accept that. No, I'm not being mischievous, but I don't think all commercial development is good development, Councillor Peltz. But this is development. I think that we need council to be mindful that it doesn't turn into 3 billboards outside Ebbing, Missouri. We don't want more. 2 is enough, I think, along there. Otherwise, we have set a precedent, and we don't want that precedent to continue. But it is a zone commercial, and we have to accept commercial activities in a commercial zone, I think, and be mindful of that when we live in those areas or co-locate in those areas. But I do hear the concerns of the residents, and I think that having it not illuminated is an alternative, a response to their concerns. There is a lot of visual clutter along that roadway because it is a commercial strip. In terms of what goes up on that billboard, I think it is the decision of the advertiser. It's not necessarily going to be exclusively TAC in this particular case, and I'm sure that the other billboard may not be TAC forever either. So I'm happy to support it with those conditions that are in place, and they are stringent. I also thank the planners. Look, you have a difficult job in interpreting the statutory regulations, and I congratulate you for the stance you've taken. But the job of council is to make decisions, and sometimes they're hard decisions, and that's the job that we are doing now. So a decision will be made.
Thank you, Councillor Reeves. Any further speakers? If there's no further speakers, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Motion's carried. Thank you. Item 5.2.2. We have a person wishing to speak to this item.
Maggie Secura.
Maggie, could you please come forward? Yeah. Welcome, Maggie.
Thank you. A few weeks ago, I took my husband to the new men's shed in Lakes Entrance and decided to take my dogs for a walk, and suddenly found the little park alongside Everett Park, which I'd never noticed before, I must admit. They really enjoyed their time there, although I kept them on their leads because I didn't know whether they would run away. However, I contacted Councillor Ellis and suggested to him that that would make an ideal little off-leash dog park. Having already lots of fences that back onto the properties and a fence on the other side along the creek drainage or whatever it is, I figured that it would be a fairly cheap option to put a couple of gates on the ends and some bins. It's already got nice shady trees and picnic tables and things in it. And I got a response from my email to say it had been handed along further, and I received the information that at this meeting there was going to be a consideration for proposal to declare an off-leash area. So I didn't know which one this was, so this is the reason I came along for. I was one of the original 124 that voted in favour of the original one that happens to be coming up tonight at Palmer's Road. I noticed that the costings of it, simply because it's an empty block of land and you've got to do lots of fencing and lots of everything, is a fairly expensive proposition, and yet this little area, or quite large area at Everett Park, would be quite a considerably cheaper option, or possibly an extra option for people that perhaps don't drive and wouldn't take their dogs as far as Palmer's Road. Everything's there basically. I know there is some objection from people whose property's back onto it. They consider it their park and they're allowed to drive in and take their caravans in and this sort of thing. But if there was a large gate down one end, well, there'd be no reason why they couldn't still access it. And so the reason I asked to speak was just to request possibly that could be an additional one or an alternative one.
Thank you, Maggie. Thank you. Yeah.
Sorry? Yes, well, I had noticed, I'd never noticed myself. It's rather a nice little spot. Okay.
Thank you, Maggie. So item 5.2.2 is a resolution to make an order that part of the former Bairnsdale Bosworth Road landfill site and 43 Palmer's Road Lakes entrance be declared as dog off-leash areas. And we have Ms Nicole Guns in attendance tonight. Nicole's our Senior Community Laws Officer and Elkie is our Communities Laws Officer. Welcome.
Good evening, everyone. All right, so the purpose of this report is to seek council resolution to effect an order to designate 2 sites as dogs off leash. One of the sites is a section of the old landfill site at Bosworth Road in Bairnsdale, and the second is 43 Palmer's Road in Lakes Entrance. The Bairnsdale site was identified as a potential site through the waste strategy and was approved at the council meeting in December 2014. Community consultation was undertaken in regards to the site at Lakes Entrance, as there were 2 potential sites. 43 Palmer's Road was the preferred site by the community. As it currently stands, the Domestic Animals Act 1994 states that it is an offence for a dog to be found at large outside the premises of the owner or not securely confined to the owner's premises. So in order to designate dogs off leash areas, the Act requires a council resolution under section 26 of the Domestic Animals Act. Our recommendation is that council makes an order under section 26 of the Act to facilitate the provision of 2 dogs off leash areas at part of the former landfill site at Bosworth Road in Bairnsdale and 43 Palmer's Road Lakes Entrance, and refers the allocation of the required budget to fence the Lakes Entrance area to the half-yearly review of the capital budget. And I suppose this has come about through increased demands from the community members for the provision to have off-leash areas. So if there's any questions, we'll answer them.
Thank you, Nicole. We certainly, as councillors, have received many letters wanting this to happen in our areas and communities. Questions, councillors? Councillor White.
From our briefings that we'd had earlier, I believe that if successful, that and with the discussion we've just had about Everett Park, that possibly other areas will be identified if it works successfully, and that many more places could be dogs off leash.
Mr Holton, would you like to reply?
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll take the liberty of responding to that. We are working on establishing a reference group right as we speak, consisting of community members from various parts of the municipality to look at the options that we have available to us in terms of actually declaring areas off-leash or declaring the entire Shire off-leash and only declaring certain areas on-leash. So we're working through the pros and cons of those processes, but we are certainly gearing up our efforts to ensure that that requirement and that desire within the community is met through more availability of areas for people to walk dogs off-leash.
Thank you, Mr Holden. Councillor Pels.
Yes, in regards to this, I'm just checking that we'll have provisions for water to be able to water the animals, and also excrement bags of some type. They'll be close at hand to the gate.
If I may, I know that the excrement bags will be a feature, but I'd have to take it on notice in terms of water. You know, if that is seen as being a requirement in that area, it is near Eastern Creek, you know, in that area. But we know that there is water at the nearby Aquadome, but I'm not sure about at Bosworth Road, and I'll have to take that on notice, Councillor. Sorry.
And as a follow-up, will there be any seating arrangements in these facilities?
First step, we and thank you for the question, Councillor. But first step would be to get this declaration done, and the second step would be to determine the full construction and the amenity of the park. And more than happy to come back to council and display whatever designs that we end up with in relation to this.
Any further questions? Councillor Reeves.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Ms Guns, thanks for that great briefing. As a community laws officer, you must have an enviable task at times about enforcement, but also education, I dare say. Do you see this in your area of work as an opportunity to be able to direct people and solve some of the issues that you might come across in your day-to-day work, and hopefully that would be of benefit for all members of the community?
Yeah, for sure, and thank you for pointing that out, Councillor. It's one of those things where, yes, you know, it's going to be a definite pro for us. We've got we'll have somewhere that we can actually send people. We know that not everyone's going to do the right thing, but at least we've got an option to, you know, say that you've got an area in Lakes Entrance and you've got an area in Bensler where you can take your dogs, and hopefully that will obviously minimise, I suppose, the community complaints around people not doing the right thing and people that aren't dog friendly, that want to be left alone. And yeah, and one of those, it's obviously education's our first and foremost. We want to do that before enforcement. And I think this is just an added tool that will just benefit everyone.
Any further questions? Do we have a move for the recommendation? Councillor Pels. Councillor Reeves. The speakers. Thank you, Councillor Pels.
Yes, I think this is so liberating, and I'm really excited to be moving this in our community as the first step to dog off leashes, because as a die-hard animal lover, I think it's really important for the animals to be able to run around and not be contained as they are at home, and it's socially exciting for them when they get outside, and to be able to advertise that we have dog off leash areas for our travellers coming through. Because a lot of people travel with caravans and their dogs these days. It's a really important first step for us. So with that in mind, I'd like to thank the officers for all the hard work, and Paul and his team for all the work they've done on this, because it's only the first stage, but it's been a really important stage for us. So thanks very much for that, and we look forward to the next step. So please support this tonight. It's really exciting.
Councillor Reeves as the seconder, would you like to speak?
Look, absolutely, and councillors and members of the public in the gallery, we know the demographic of of our community. We're getting older, and companion animals, in particular dogs, are really, really important. And some of us with dodgier knees and hips can't exercise our dogs at the rate that the dogs require sometimes. So having somewhere where we can let them loose while their owners have a little bit of social interaction as well, because we know how important it is and how dogs can bring people together. So I think there's a lot of community benefit that goes beyond what we see on the surface here. So nice work all.
Thank you, Councillor Reeves. Any further speakers? If there's no further speakers, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Motion's carried. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, Al. Item 5.3.1. Chris Wayne's the acting manager in this role. Would you like to come forward, Chris? It's 5.3.1 is the Regional and District Event Sponsorship, or RAIDS as it's known, Round 1 2018-19 assessment. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you, councillors. The purpose of the Regional and District Events Sponsorship, or the RAIDS funding program, is to support the facilitation enhancement of events held in East Gippsland Shire. Funding for the RAIDS program is focused on economic benefit to East Gippsland and attracting visitors from around Victoria, interstate, internationally via visitation and marketing. Round 1 of the East Gippsland Shire Council's grants program opened on Wednesday the 6th of June 2018 and closed on Wednesday the 1st of August 2018. The grant round was advertised by direct email to community groups, in Council Connect newsletters, in local newspapers and throughout East Gippsland Shire Council's websites. Council received 6 applicants for the first round of the 2018-19 funding program with a total value of $42,315. Each year there are 2 rounds of funding, and round 1 normally receives the bulk of the applications. The review panel considered it appropriate to allocate approximately more than 2/3 of the funds available to this round, recommending $32,000 be allocated, leaving $11,400 for round 2. Council continues to make commitments to fund events for up to 3 years, and because of this, Council has already pre-committed $62,000 worth of funds for the 2018-19 financial year, leaving a balance of $43,400 for this financial year. This equates to 20 events that will be run through the funding so far this financial year. The panel has recommended the allocation of the funds to these events, as indicated in the report. The allocation for $32,000 from round 1 of the 2018-19 RAIDS program for the 2018-19 financial year would be for $7,000 for Thought Sports Mitchell River Trail Run, $5,000 for the CLB 3x3 Lakes Entrance Basketball program, $2,000 to support the Meetung Business and Tourism Association holding the Meetung Village Green Family Film Nights, $10,000 for the Omeo Region Business and Tourism Association Omeo High Country Paddock to Plate Roaston Farmers Market, $3,000 for the Surf Life Saving Lakes Entrance to hold Gippsland Lakes Paddle Challenge, and $5,000 for the Thought Sports to hold the Mitchell River Extreme. The panel has also recommended the Council allocates $29,000 from the 2019-2020 RAIDS program and the same amount from the 2020-2021 RAIDS program in the following ways that are read in the report, and that's $7,000 to the Thought Sports to hold Mitchell River Trail Run, $5,000 for the CLB 3x3 Lakes Entrance Basketball Competition, $10,000 for the Omeo Region Business and Tourism Association High Country Paddock to Plate Roaston Farmers Market, $2,000 to the Surf Life Saving Lakes Entrance Club to hold the Lakes Paddle Challenge, and $5,000 for the Thought Sports to hold the Mitchell River Extreme.
Thank you, Mr Wayne. Questions, councillors? Councillor Pels.
Have there been any applications for any of this funding from areas east of Lakes Entrance? Because I distinctly see Buchan, Orbost, Han River, Malakuta missing from the equation, and I feel it's a, I feel like they're not getting additional help in that area, if that's the case.
Yes. If I may respond to that. You might notice in the background that there are a number of events that have been funded for multiple years. So under background, you'll see a list where we have the Deep Winter Festival, which was funded for 2 years, and it will, again, that's in Orbost, which will, it comes up for its final funding year next year, 2019-20. There's the Snowy River Sprint, also coming up in the 1920. So, which is just listed below that. These are events that have already been agreed to, but they run over multiple years. So there is a spread across the municipality. Those events came up in the last funding round, but they are funded over a number of years. So there's a spread going forward through a number of events in other locations that are already pre-committed to.
Further questions, councillors? If there's no further questions, there is a recommendation. Moved Councillor Reeves, seconded Councillor O'Connell. Speakers, thank you.
I think enough's been said. Councillor Pelch, you raised a good point, but those are as noted. But it would be great to see them even further east. But there are some great events, and I urge all members of the community to participate in them. There's some rippers coming up.
Thank you, Councillor Reeves. Would the seconder like to speak? If there's no further speakers, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against? That's carried. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Wayne. Item 5.4.1 is the appointment of Chief Executive Officer, Mr. Anthony Basford. There's a report that's been tabled.
In the absence of Ms Bennett, I think it's a pretty straightforward administrative recommendation as part of the process for the recruitment of the CEO.
Thank you. Any speakers, any questions, councillors? Moved Councillor Reeves, seconded Councillor Pells.
Happy to speak just briefly and
thank you, Councillor Reeves.
And acknowledge Mr. Basford's appointment, but also look forward in the next while to acknowledging the work that has been done by our current CEO and wishing him well in his next career move.
Thank you, Councillor Reeves. The seconder, would you like to speak?
I'd just like to re-incur my colleagues' comments and say it was a really interesting process to be going through. I think the interview process was really beneficial. I think all councillors came to a unanimous decision and were supportive of the outcome. And it was something that we did as a group, as a whole. Even the missing councillors today were participants, and they were supportive of the outcome that we've actually come to the conclusion. So, with that said, I think we look forward to a new era, a new time, and wish our current CEO all the best for his endeavours.
Thank you, Councillor Pearls, and I certainly concur with the comments made. If there's no further speakers, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. Item 5.4.2 is the adoption of the internal audit plan, and we have in attendance Ms. Kaya Cashman. Thank you.
Thank you. Great. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The report before you seeks Council's approval of the new internal audit plan for the period 2018 to 2021. This plan has been developed in conjunction with the initiation of a new contract with Crowe Horwath Accountants and Advisors, who are Council's new audit, internal audit consultant. The plan before you obviously sets out a plan for the next 3 years, focusing on specific areas of risk or identified topics that have gone through quite a consultative process with the Audit and Risk Committee. The first year will be beginning obviously in October of this year, and we have identified through that consultation process 3 key areas of focus, being contract management, management of former landfill sites, and project management. Following that, there are a number of other topics that have been identified for future years within the 3-year plan, but obviously with the environment that we work in and other risks that come up, we are hoping that we have some degree of fluidity with identifying those audits so that we can make sure that we're putting our best foot forward with the quality assurance and with our governance regime. So unless there are any other further questions on the particular plan that we're proposing, I ask that you consider the recommendation before you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Cashman. Councillors, any questions? So there's a recommendation before us. You're moving that, Councillor White? You moved Councillor White. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Pales? Councillor White, would you like to speak?
Well, I would just like to acknowledge the work that the officers have put into this proposal, and I can see that it's been well thought out and that we should have a good system in place going forward. So thank you, Ms Cashman.
Thank you, Councillor White. Councillor Pales?
Yes, I'd just like to say it's been a joint effort with the Audit Committee people as well, and it's something that we anticipate is an area that needs a bit of work on, and we look forward to the outcomes and having some new direction and guidelines to be going by at the end of this report. So it's a great step forward for us, and I think it'll be a good thing for council into the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pales. Any further speakers? No further speakers. I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against? That's carried. Thank you. Thank you, Ms Cashman. And councillors, that brings us to item 6, urgent and other business.
Nil received.
Nil. So before we deal with parts of item 7 and reopen back to the public, we have some contracts to consider, councillors, therefore require a motion. Councillor O'Connell.
Council will now close the meeting to the public in accordance with the provisions of section 89 2D and H of the Local Government Act 1989 to consider items 7.1 to 7.3, as these items relate to contractual matters, and any other matter that the council considers would prejudice the council or any person.
Thank you, Councillor O'Connell. Do we have a seconder for that? Councillor Pels. All those in favour? Against? Thank you.